"You're nothing but a damn janitor, Carter." Richard Whitmore's voice thundered through the office. The entire floor fell silent. Dozens of employees froze, eyes darting between their furious boss and the man standing before him. Marcus Carter, gripping the handle of his mop, met Richard's glare. His pulse pounded, but he refused to look away. "I don't pay you to stand around," Richard spat. "This is a business, not your personal lounge." Marcus clenched his jaw. He had only paused to wipe sweat from his forehead. Nothing more. But that didn't matter. Richard had been waiting for this moment, eager to remind everyone who held the power. "You don't belong here," Richard continued, stepping closer. "Now, get out of my building." The humiliation burned through Marcus's chest like fire. Around him, whispers buzzed. He wasn't just being fired, he was being publicly erased. No one spoke, no one moved. The office, once alive with the hum of productivity, had become a stage. Employees stood frozen, their gazes flickering with unease. Some exchanged nervous glances, while others pretended to be focused on their screens. A few found amusement in the spectacle. A smirk here, a muffled chuckle there. In the back, someone discreetly raised their phone, recording every second. Marcus swallowed hard. He wasn't expecting anyone to stand up for him, but the sheer indifference in their eyes twisted something deep inside. They saw, they heard, and yet they chose silence. Richard scoffed and bent down, grabbing Marcus's mop. With an effortless flick, he tossed it at his feet. "Pick it up," he sneered. "Come on, show everyone what you're really worth." Marcus stared at the mop lying between them. His fingers curled into fists. "You hear me?" Richard stepped closer, voice dripping with mockery. "Men like you don't belong in offices. You clean floors. That's your place. That's all you'll ever be." A few snickers rippled through the crowd. Marcus inhaled sharply, forcing down the rage bubbling inside him. Not here, not now. He looked up at Richard, eyes steady. "One day you'll regret this." Richard let out a bark of laughter. "Yeah? And what are you going to do, mop me to death?" The room erupted in cruel laughter. But Marcus didn't laugh. He just memorized the moment. Every word, every face. Two security guards appeared at Marcus's sides. Rough hands grabbed his arms, yanking him back. "Let me go," Marcus growled, struggling against their grip. Richard folded his arms, watching with smug amusement. "Escort him out, and make sure he never sets foot in here again." The guards dragged Marcus toward the glass doors, past rows of silent employees. He locked eyes with Richard one last time. The smirk on the man's face burned into his memory. This was the moment, the breaking point. Marcus didn't plead, he didn't argue, he simply memorized every face, every whisper, every second of this humiliation. Then, beneath the rage simmering in his chest, something else took root. A promise. One day he'd be back, and when he returned, the roles would be reversed. The doors slammed shut behind him. The laughter still echoed in his ears. The weight of a dozen indifferent stares clung to him like a second skin. But Marcus didn't look back. He exhaled slowly, his hands steady. They thought they had crushed him. They had no idea what they had just created. Marcus sat cross-legged on the worn living room floor, staring at the rejection letter in his trembling hands. His mother knelt beside him, her eyes filled with an unshakable fire. "Marcus, listen to me," she said, her voice steady. "The world will try to push you down. They will judge you before they even know you. But you?" She placed a gentle hand on his chest. "You don't let them break you." Tears burned at the corners of his eyes, but he nodded. "They can take away your chances, but they can never take away your mind. And that?" She smiled. "That makes you unstoppable." Her words would never leave him. Marcus sat in front of his laptop, another rejection email staring back at him. "Your qualifications are impressive, but we've decided to move forward with other candidates." The same script, different companies. He leaned back, exhaling slowly. He had graduated top of his class. Every internship, every project, he had excelled. Yet, time and time again, his applications were dismissed before he even got the chance to prove himself. The doubt crept in. Maybe he wasn't good enough. Maybe they were right. Then his mother's voice echoed in his mind. Never let them break you. He shut the laptop. He'd find another way. Marcus ran the mop across the tiled floor, the scent of disinfectant filling the air. You missed a spot, a passing employee muttered, barely sparing him a glance. He ignored it. Instead, he focused on the book propped open on the supply cart, Principles of Business Strategy. His classmates had jobs in finance, marketing, corporate offices. Marcus had a mop and night classes. But he also had a plan. He wasn't just cleaning floors. He was studying everything. The business structures, the power plays, the way success was built. One day, he wouldn't just work in an office. He'd own one. They never saw him, not really. Marcus walked past desks, his presence barely acknowledged. To them, he was a uniform, not a person. But as they overlooked him, he watched them. How deals were made, how leaders carried themselves, how the system worked. Knowledge was power. And while they ignored him, he was collecting every ounce of it. He was invisible to them now. But soon, they wouldn't be able to look away. Marcus stepped away from the office, shoulders squared, gaze fixed ahead. His mother's words whispered through his mind, "Never let them break you." And he never would. Marcus pushed the mop bucket into the hallway just as a group of executives passed by. Their conversation didn't pause until they saw him. "Oh, you're still here?" One of them, a junior manager, scoffed. "Thought you'd moved on to bigger things." The others chuckled, stepping around him like he was part of the furniture. Marcus clenched his jaw. They never spoke to him, only around him. His presence was invisible until there was a spill on the floor. Then, suddenly, he existed. They didn't see the man with ambition. Just a uniform, just another nobody. But Marcus saw everything. "Hey, Carter," Richard called from across the break room, smirking. "Quick question. When you clean my office, do you ever dream about sitting behind my desk?" The room tensed. A few employees exchanged uneasy glances. Some avoided eye contact altogether. Marcus exhaled slowly. "I'm just here to work." Richard laughed, shaking his head. "That's the spirit. Know your place, keep your head down, and you'll do just fine." A nervous chuckle rippled through the room. Some laughed because they thought it was funny. Others laughed because they were afraid not to. Marcus gripped the mop handle tighter. One day, they'd laugh for a different reason. Late one night, Marcus emptied the trash near Richard's office. Inside, Richard's voice carried. "It's simple," he bragged. "I hire the right kind of people. Clients want to see faces they can trust. You get what I mean?" The other man chuckled knowingly. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. He had applied for an entry-level office job here once, never got a call back. And now, the truth stared him in the face. Richard never even considered him. Not because of his skills, but because of his skin. He exhaled slowly. The game was rigged, but Marcus had never been one to play by the rules. Later that night, Marcus found himself in Richard's office, wiping down the desk. A stack of papers sat abandoned. One page caught his eye. A business proposal. The margins were covered in notes, most of them frustrated scribbles. Marcus skimmed it. The company was hemorrhaging money due to inefficiencies. He had seen them firsthand: supply waste, mismanagement, outdated practices. An idea formed. He grabbed a scrap of paper from his pocket and jotted down a few suggestions. Cost-cutting strategies, workflow improvements, things he had observed while being ignored. This was his chance. If he could prove his worth, maybe, just maybe, he could be seen for more than just the man with a mop. He folded the note and left it on Richard's desk. The next morning, Marcus watched as Richard unfolded the note. For a brief second, curiosity flickered in his expression. Then, just as quickly, it twisted into a sneer. Richard crumpled the paper, tossing it into the trash. Janitors don't do business. He didn't even look at Marcus, just turned away, laughing under his breath. Humiliation burned in Marcus's chest. But so did something else. Because Richard had just made the biggest mistake of his life. The office buzzed with its usual chatter, until Richard's voice cut through the air. "Where's the laptop, Marcus?" Heads turned. Conversation stopped. Marcus frowned. "What?" Richard strode forward, shaking his head in mock disappointment. "Don't play dumb. The laptop from my office. Gone. And you were the last one there." A few gasps, whispers. Marcus's chest tightened. "I didn't take anything." Richard chuckled darkly. "Really? Because security says no one else entered after you." More murmurs. Doubt crept into familiar faces. Marcus scanned the room, searching for someone, anyone, to vouch for him. But all he saw were shifting gazes, hushed conversations, and phones discreetly raised, recording. Richard crossed his arms. "So, where is it?" Marcus clenched his fists. He knew what was happening. Richard wasn't just accusing him. He was making sure everyone saw it. The setup was perfect. And Marcus was trapped. Marcus turned to the crowd. "You all know me." His voice was steady, but his pulse raced. "I've been here for years." Silence. A few employees exchanged nervous glances. Others avoided his eyes entirely. Some whispered, their faces unreadable. Richard exhaled dramatically. "Funny, isn't it?" He gestured toward the bystanders. "Not a single person stepped up for you." A flicker of hope. Danielle. She hesitated, shifting on her heels. Marcus met her gaze, silently pleading, but she looked away. The message was clear. No one wanted to risk their own position. No one wanted to be next. Richard smirked. "Seems like you're on your own, buddy." The walls of the office suddenly felt smaller, the stairs sharper. Marcus wasn't just accused, he was abandoned. Richard took a slow step forward, voice dripping with mock sympathy. "You know, I wanted to believe you were different, Marcus." Marcus's stomach twisted. He knew what was coming. "But I knew you people were like this," Richard continued, shaking his head. "Always looking for an easy way up. Always taking what isn't yours." A stunned silence filled the room. Marcus inhaled sharply. "Say that again." Richard grinned. "Why? Are you going to do something about it?" A few uneasy chuckles. Some laughed nervously. Others didn't bother hiding their amusement. Marcus's fingers twitched at his sides. He wanted to fight back, wanted to shatter the smug look on Richard's face. But that's exactly what he wanted, a reaction, a reason to justify his cruelty. So Marcus did the only thing he could. He stared Richard down and let the weight of his silence speak for him. "Check the cameras," Marcus urged, his voice raw. "Check my locker, my bag. I have nothing to hide." Richard rolled his eyes. Security already looked. Guess what? No footage. He smirked. "Convenient, huh?" Marcus turned to the employees. "You know I wouldn't do this." His voice cracked. "Somebody, anybody, tell the truth." No one spoke. Richard sighed dramatically. "You're embarrassing yourself, man. Just admit it." Marcus's breath came shallow. The humiliation burned hotter than his anger. He had spent years proving himself, working harder, holding his head high, and none of it mattered. His voice dropped to a whisper. "I didn't do this." Richard grinned. "Doesn't really matter, does it?" Because the damage was already done. The security guards arrived. Strong hands grabbed Marcus's arms. "Wait." "Company policy," one of them muttered. "We have to escort you out." Gasps. Phones lifted. Fingers typed rapidly. Marcus fought against the humiliation threatening to drown him. "You're making a mistake." Richard chuckled. "Oh, I don't think so." Step by step, they dragged him past the people who had once greeted him with nods and small talk. Now, they have only started. The doors loomed ahead. Marcus lifted his chin, jaw tight. They thought this was his end. They had no idea. This was just the beginning. The hum of a powerful engine silenced the usual office chatter. A sleek, jet-black luxury car glided to a stop in front of the building. Employees paused, exchanging curious glances. "Who's that?" someone muttered. "Must be a new investor," another guessed. The tinted door eased open. Polished shoes met the pavement. A tall, commanding figure stepped out, adjusting his cufflinks with practiced ease. Whispers spread like wildfire. The presence of wealth, power, authority was undeniable. "Whoever it is," Richard scoffed from the sidelines, "they're about to see how I run things around here." He had no idea. The murmurs grew as the man strode forward, confidence in every step. Then someone gasped, "Wait, is that—" Recognition dawned slowly, uncertainty flickering across faces. The suit, the presence, it didn't match the man they remembered. Marcus. Richard's smirk faltered. Gone was the quiet janitor, the easy target. This man, this version of Marcus, was something entirely different. Richard forced a chuckle. Well, look who decided to dress up. You lost, Marcus?" Marcus simply smiled. "Not at all. I know exactly where I'm supposed to be." His voice was steady, unshaken. Richard crossed his arms. "You think a fancy suit changes anything?" Marcus tilted his head. "You tell me." Richard's gut twisted, though he couldn't say why. The shift had begun. Richard tried to keep his composure, but something was off. The employees, his employees, weren't laughing. They weren't looking at Marcus with the usual condescension. They were watching him. For the first time in years, Richard felt small. Marcus scanned the room, the same office that had once swallowed him whole. "Funny," he mused. "I remember standing right there." He pointed to the spot where he'd been humiliated. "When someone decided to throw away everything I'd worked for." Richard stiffened. "You had nothing to lose. Maybe then." Marcus met his gaze, but times change. A bead of sweat formed at Richard's temple. This wasn't the Marcus he had dismissed. This wasn't someone he could control. For the first time, Richard wasn't standing on solid ground, and Marcus wasn't done. Richard forced a laugh. "All right, enough of this little act. Who are you really working for?" Marcus reached into his pocket, pulled out a document, and held it up. Silence. Eyes widened as the company's official logo gleamed at the top. Marcus let the words settle before speaking, voice calm, deliberate. "Didn't you hear?" His smirk deepened. "I bought the company." The weight of the statement crushed the air from the room. Richard's face was drained of color. Marcus stepped closer. "Now, let's talk about your future." Because he was just beginning, Richard chuckled, shaking his head. "That's cute, Marcus, really. But let's be serious. Who put you up to this?" Silence. Then a voice from HR. "It's true, Richard. Marcus owns the company now." The laughter died instantly. Richard's smirk faltered, eyes darting around for some kind of reassurance. None came. Marcus walked past Richard without a glance, his steps measured, deliberate. Through the hallway, past the gawking employees, straight to the CEO's office. His office. The same room where Richard had once humiliated him. Now, Marcus reached for the chair, the one that had been out of reach for so long, and sat down. The weight of the moment settled in. Richard stood frozen at the doorway, a sinking realization in his eyes. The power had shifted. A thick folder slid across the desk. Marcus flipped it open, eyes scanning the text. Richard swallowed hard. "Marcus, you wouldn't—" The pen met paper. Marcus signed without hesitation. HR cleared their throat. "Richard, effective immediately. Your employment is terminated." The words hit like a punch. His years of control, authority, gone with a single stroke of ink. Richard's hands trembled. "You can't do this." Marcus finally met his gaze. "I just did." Richard's throat tightened. "This is personal." Marcus leaned back, calm, composed. "No, Richard." He let the silence hang before delivering the final blow. "CEOs do business. the very words Richard once used against him. A slow clap erupted from the office floor. Cheers followed. Marcus simply smiled. Have you ever faced discrimination in the workplace? Have you been judged not for your work, but for who you are? Share your story in the comments. If you were Marcus, what would you have done? Would you seek revenge or justice? Like, share, and comment. Let's start a conversation that truly matters.